Everyone's arguing over who and what is in the Einstein files, but almost nobody's asking the scarier questions. What are the Einstein files exactly, and what are they not? Because this release mixes official FBI interviews, emails, server materials, and publicly submitted accusations, and it often doesn't clearly differentiate them. So in other words, they don't specify what's real and what's fake. Now, is this intentional? I'll let you decide. And on top of that, there's a second problem. We don't have the full data set. Only about half of the files have been released. Tonight, I'm going to talk about the timeline of how Einstein was exposed, who did the work that mattered, and what the release structure gets wrong, and why, legally, some people the public is furious about may never face prosecution at all. The archive contains official investigative material like FBI interview summaries, internal records, and unverified submissions, meaning tips, letters, narratives, and accusations from everyday people. Now, the core issue is that the public is facing releases that don't always represent clear credibility hierarchy. So the viewer scrolls a document and subconsciously assumes if it's here, it's vetted. But that's not how this type of archive works. How many files exist? Well, here's what we can say with official support. The DOJ says the January 30th, 2026 tranche brings total production to nearly 3.5 million pages, plus 2,000 videos and 180,000 images. Multiple reports and lawmakers and victim advocates say millions more remain withheld or under review. I've heard up to 6 million. Now, incorporate your 6 million versus 3 million point as the contested figure. Here's where it gets messy. DOJ says 3.5 million pages are out, but the political fight right now is over what's still missing. And some reporting and advocacy claims put the full universe higher in the ballpark of 6 million total records and pages, meaning the public may be seeing only about half. Even if that exact number shifts, the core fact doesn't. There are millions more beyond what's released. And we don't have a clean public inventory of what categories dominate what's withheld. If you're forming conclusions from the incomplete data set, you're not doing an investigation. You're doing inference. Now let's look at the timeline. 2002, Vanity Fair begins reporting and profiling Einstein. Allegations existed, but were not published in that 2003 piece the way they could have been. The later retrospective on why those allegations weren't included is heavily discussed. 2003, Vanity Fair publishes The Talented Mr. Einstein. It's a profile, not a criminal expose. Now, this is the moment a lot of people missed. The press had smoking signals very early, but it wasn't yet a coordinated public criminal narrative. 2005, Palm Beach police investigation begins after allegations about underage girls. 2006, evidence mounts. Case enters state and federal orbit. Public awareness rises as local reporting and legal process advances. The case ends in a lenient outcome widely criticized later. The secret, controversial deal becomes a central outrage point in later reporting. Whatever you think happened behind the scenes, the public record shows the outcome was unusually favorable, and that fact becomes rocket fuel later. 2018, Miami Herald's Julie K. Brown publishes the Perversion of Justice investigation, widely credited with reigniting scrutiny and helping drive federal action. 2019, Einstein is arrested on federal charges, finally. Einstein dies in custody under questionable circumstances, August 2019. The official finding, he unalived himself. If you want the cleanest answer to who actually moved the needle, it's hard to argue against the 2018 Miami Herald work as the inflection point. Newly released materials reportedly include a draft statement announcement dated August 9th, 2019. That's one day before he was actually found dead on August 10th, raising questions about why the date is earlier. This is not the same as a medical pronouncement. It reads more like pre-drafted messaging. One of the strangest items people are circling is a draft prosecutorial statement dated August 9th, 2019, one day before Einstein was found dead. That doesn't prove foreknowledge of death, but it could mean a template, a clerical date, a pre-written contingency statement, or something else entirely. But it doesn't prove this. The release contains artifacts that raise legitimate procedural questions, and those questions deserve disciplined analysis, not just instant conspiracy. But it still makes you wonder. It's quite suspicious, don't you think? And many of you have asked, what about the statute of limitations? And I've done a short video on this. The honest answer, sometimes yes, sometimes no, depending on which jurisdiction, which offense, victim's age at the time when it was reported, whether tolling applies, and whether later laws apply prospectively only. Federal youth illegal movement law is anchored in 18 U.S.C. 1591, and federal law also has special limitation rules for offenses against youth, extension 18 U.S.C. 3283, and that extends the prosecution windows substantially. CRS overview notes that some youth SA provisions have no statute of limitations under certain cited statutes. At the federal level, people assume statute of limitations equals automatic escape, but that's not always true, especially for offenses involving minors, but it is also not a guarantee that every accusation remains chargeable. State statute of limitation rules vary dramatically and have changed over time. For New York's framework and changes, the New York court's guidance is a practical public reference point. For Florida, the underlying SA statutes are defined in places like Florida Statute 800.04, but statute of limitation depends on additional provisions and timing. Here's the brutal reality. Even if something is morally monstrous, the legal system may be unable to prosecute it decades later, especially if the specific charge doesn't fit a category with extended or eliminated limitations. So if you see a name and ask, why aren't they arrested? The uncomfortable answer may be because the clock ran out, or because the evidence in the archive isn't charge ready, or both. One of the most unsettling things that people began to notice after the Einstein files were released didn't come from names or testimony, it came from the files themselves. Independent researchers, archivists, and technically minded analysts started reporting something unusual: hidden hyperlinks and embedded data inside images and PDFs that were part of the Einstein document releases. Not obvious links, not annotations, but data concealed inside the images, a technique known as steganography. Now here's why this matters. Steganography isn't accidental in most contexts. It's a deliberate method used when someone wants information to exist without being obvious. Researchers claim that when these images were processed, pulled apart layer by layer, they revealed links leading to archived or inactive websites, obscure domains with symbolic imagery, pages filled with repetitive language, ritualistic phrasing, or symbolic structures. Now, some of these sites appeared abandoned, others appeared intentionally sparse, as if meant to only be found by those looking in the right place. And this is where the conversation shifts from coincidence to pattern. Because this wasn't one image, it wasn't one file, it wasn't just one researcher. Multiple people working independently reported similarly discovering across multiple different parts of the archive. That doesn't improve intent, but it strongly suggests consistency. And consistency is where investigation begins. Because when you consider this, government releases are typically scrubbed, metadata removed, images flattened, hidden layers destroyed. So the question becomes, why would any embedded data survive at all? Was it overlooked? Was it missed? Or was it never meant to be found by casual readers? The truth is, we don't know. But pretending it's meaningless without fully mapping it would be intellectually dishonest. Because when hidden structures exist inside sensitive materials tied to one of the most secretive networks in modern history, curiosity isn't conspiracy, it's due diligence. Now, there's also a phrase or a word that keeps surfacing in the Einstein-related communications, quietly, repeatedly, and without explanation: jerky. On its face, it sounds mundane, harmless, forgettable, but language inside closed networks often works that way. The jerky reference appears in contexts that have led some researchers to believe it may be coded language, like pizza, a placeholder term whose real meaning is understood only by those inside the circle. The idea isn't far-fetched. Criminal and intelligence networks have long used innocuous words to describe illicit activity, food terms as euphemisms, casual language to avoid detection. And what makes jerky stand out is not just the word itself, but it's how and where it appears. It surfaces in the communications where the surrounding context feels transactional. The meaning is never clarified, and the term is used as if everyone involved already understands it. That's how internal shorthand works. Now, to be clear, no public document definitively decodes jerky. But there's the important distinction. Lack of an official explanation does not equal lack of meaning. It simply means the meaning hasn't been publicly established. And when you're dealing with a network built on discretion, plausible deniability, and compartmentalization, coded language is exactly what you would expect. So the real investigative question isn't, is the word innocent or sinister? It's, why does it recur without clarification in a context where clarity would normally be expected? That's not proof, but it is a signal. And signals deserve examination. not dismissal. Now, Asmon Gold did a great video on what he thinks it means, and I think he might be right. Now, let's talk about Bitcoin, because this is where finance, timing, and secrecy intersect in a way that's hard to ignore. I've covered this in a previous video, but since others are starting to talk about it, I thought I would revisit it. Jeffrey Epstein operated in a world defined by offshore structures, complex financial routing, a desire for discretion, and a need to move money outside traditional oversight. Bitcoin, especially in its early years, offered exactly that. Early Bitcoin wasn't mainstream. It wasn't regulated, and it wasn't well understood. It was used by people who valued anonymity, wanted financial mobility, and didn't want questions asked. Now, do we have a signed transaction proving that Epstein controlled a specific wallet? Not yet, but that's how early Bitcoin networks worked. Wallets were anonymous, unnamed, often controlled through intermediaries, and designed specifically to avoid attribution. Now, what raises eyebrows is the timing. Einstein's legal and reputational troubles escalated during the same era when cryptocurrency was becoming a viable alternative to traditional banking rails. And multiple researchers have pointed out wallet activity that aligns with known Einstein-related timeframes, the broader pattern of high-risk networks migrating to crypto during that period, and the strategic advantage that crypto would offer someone already operating in legal gray zones. None of this is definitive proof, but it is strategically coherent, and in investigative work, coherency matters. The absence of a smoking gun doesn't erase the logic of the behavior. It simply tells us if crypto was used, it was used precisely because proving it would be difficult, which is exactly the point. And when you step back and look at these threads together, hidden data, coded language, opaque finance, you start to see something unsettling, not chaos, but structure. So here's what we learned. The public archive mixes official records, unverified submissions from everyday people in ways that can confuse credibility, and it's not marked clearly. The release set, about 3.5 million pages, may not be the full universe, and millions more appear to remain withheld or under review. The real investigative timeline shows the work took decades, and specific journalists actually shifted the case. The legal system is not built to satisfy public fury on a schedule. Statutes and evidence rules decide what happens next. Einstein may have worked with and on early Bitcoin usage and creation. Now, I'm working on finishing out a little construction project that you can see here behind me. Hopefully it should be complete by the end of the week. My posting schedule may be a little bit more sporadic until it's completed, but I appreciate everyone's support, including the channel members, moderators, and viewers just like you. And if you want to support the channel, there are links in the description for donating, channel merch, affiliate links, and where to send tips and emails. And as always, I'll see you on the next one.